Hello, and thank you for joining our Stream of Conscious ADHD podcast. I'm Heidi Fawcett, along with my sister Heather. We are Gen X in menopause and, surprise, newly diagnosed with ADHD. Since we found out about our ADHD during the pandemic, we have spent most weekends sitting in my backyard in Brooklyn with our champagne brunch discussing the impact, the reflections, the grief, the stories. Many adults are now finding they were never diagnosed, so we thought we would bring everyone into our backyard discovery sessions, hoping it will help. We laugh, we cry, we are stream of consciousness conversationalists. We hope you enjoy listening to our discovery and perhaps glean some comfort from it. Here we go, into the backyard.
So today we are not coming from the backyard because it's too freaking hot in New York City. We've had a high heat warning for the last 3 days.
Yeah.
Okay, the topics that I picked out, and I did some research on these.
Good.
So I will pull up the tabs as I going through this. And we probably will get interrupted often because we've got new kittens and they will probably do funny things. Anyway, so these are the topics that I have. The spitting out the gum, putting it into the M&Ms on the subway, and then the excitedly making plans with friends, and then regret and feeling complete dread because you don't want to do it, and sometimes carefully because you're that in dread of doing the thing. And then
Smile life.
that thing right there.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And then buying exercise equipment and never using it, or starting a hobby and it just gets ignored. So we're going to talk about those things. And I did do a whole little, well, maybe I just left it in the tabs. See, I don't have Google tabs in my mind like you do and Rachel does. And so that's another thing that I want to do is to come up with a chart, because I'm coming up with the whole menu. I'm coming up with the menu. There's so many on there right now, but I'm also wanting to do like, here is a symptom. Heather has it. Yes. Grace has it. Yes. Heidi has it. No. Rachel has it. Yes. I want to try and figure out, because I really feel like the people who have the superpower are the ones with the tabs, but that's all I'm going to say.
I don't like the concept of superpower. That puts a lot of pressure on people.
It does, but I think that it helps when you know that you're super focused on a thing that everyone else wouldn't think twice about. I could edit a movie really well because I notice all the mistakes in the movies where,
Well, that's a very ADHD thing to do pattern recognition. We're good at pattern recognition.
all right, there. Sorry, I told you kittens were going to make us laugh.
Yes. We have Poppy and Lily joining us in the podcast today. They don't
Yeah.
speak English. They're only 4 months old, so they don't speak anything. But they're
Although
really cute.
one of them is very verbal. Which one? Poppy. If you would like to take a moment and say hi to the audience, we will allow that.
She's too busy with her present hyper focus, which is play with her sister.
Okay, so first we will take, what did I say first? Splitting the gum in two. Okay, so when Heather and I were kids, and it's just so random because I don't know if either of us knew the other one was doing this, or maybe one of us announced it and the other one was like, oh my God, I must do that too. But I remember driving down the road in our parents' car, the Pinto, and we would have gum in our mouth and it would get to that point where it's rank and you don't want to chew on it anymore. So we would roll down the window, but we would, before just like throwing our gum out the window, we would split it in two. And we were just like, okay, this is a thing that we do. And then one day we were reminded of that. We were on the subway.
We were I'm guessing we were coming back from Rosa Mexicana.
Oh, yes, one of our favorite days.
And it had to be coming back because they have really good margaritas. And otherwise, we would not be so giddy about things that
We're rolling around on the subway.
Yeah.
So we were worried about these M&Ms somebody had obviously dropped on the subway. Some poor kid was like, "Oh no, my M&Ms." But we were so concerned about these M&Ms and wanted to make sure that they were not lonely or alone.
We were grown women
Yes.
in our 30s.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, we just got back from Rosa Mexicana, which is an amazing place. Is it still open in that location?
Yes, it is.
The one in the financial district closed, RIP.
Oh,
Which is super sad.
did not know that.
But they serve really great margaritas and guacamole. But we were watching these M&M. We were sitting on the subway as the subway goes and stops.
Yes.
Stops and goes.
Yeah,
That's
whatever.
the proper order. We were watching these M&Ms rolling around, and we both became strangely wistful. We are in our 30s.
Uh-huh.
And yes, we had margaritas, but this is our childlike brains thinking. I
Right,
guess, on top of-
exactly.
And so we were a little triggered by it, right? Like the concept of these are inanimate objects, but and I'm going to try to say the word, but I've had a glass of bubbles. So yes, that's Heidi's just showing me her screen, which I couldn't see before, but we were anthropomorphizing these inanimate objects.
Okay, and I did not know that word. I did not know what it meant. And when
Yeah.
I went to do my research, oh my gosh, Lily's going to come tap dance on my keyboard. When I was trying to do research on this thing, and it wasn't even, I told you,
She totally did.
it wasn't even because I was looking into this whole thing about, okay, so let me back up. So when doing research on this, because this is something we did as kids, and then coming back and seeing certain traits in my daughter Grace, where she has become basically a hoarder because she can't throw anything away because she gives meaning and sometimes human-like traits to inanimate objects, which is this. Can you say it again? Because I'm not going to be able to.
It's anthropomorphizing.
Oh my gosh. Never, even if I hadn't been
And
drinking.
the anthro part is like the human part, like anthropology.
Yeah, that.
And then the morphing is the body. The izing is the izing.
But it all boils down to empathy. And so there are certain, and I didn't realize this, but usually ADHDers have a lack of empathy, but there are a select few who have extreme empathy. And Grace is one of those people.
I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
Wow. Where you feel, you just feel, you can feel other people's pain. Like you see pain in the world and you take it on yourself, and it's very unpleasant.
Right. And they say if you actually physically feel pain,
Yes.
which like blows my mind. I always thought like the amygdala stuff, I'll cry. I like feeling physical pain. That's, I guess like the heartbroken thing, right?
Yeah, and you just get a very in your core. It's just you feel so unpleasant. It's just you feel disturbed, and it just manifests in ways that are unpleasant. I don't know how to describe it, but I think that's the empath, right?
Yes. And so I was reading this article on Healthline, and that's where they were saying that usually it's lack of empathy. But where people do have the high empathy with ADHDers, it says you might be hypersensitive to information in the environment or find it harder to filter sensory input that you receive from others, including subtle emotional cues, and changes in facial expressions even, or tones of voice. Because I know I can see when Grace, she doesn't want to feel this way. So she recognizes it in someone, and then she just feels, oh, I have to help this person. And I guess in turn, you're like, don't want anyone to feel like the way you have felt.
And it's interesting because the whole being able to read facial expressions really well, there's folks who are extremely good at reading people. And I know you've talked about this, like you can really tell almost immediately who people are and people that you want to not be near. It's like a form of protection.
Right.
You can read people's faces, like they can be talking to you and you can read them and understand their motivation or whatever. And you're like, yeah, no, thank you.
So this might be surprising to you or not, but it makes complete sense to me as I
I'd
was
love
looking
to
into this
try.
research, is that the ADHD and empathy is so closely intertwined with the rejection
Oh,
sensitivity
yes.
dysphoria.
Yes. Holy
Um,
cow.
So I just think that's so interesting because when I go to put things on my menu list, like these are two distinct things, but yet they talk about how maybe you can't have one without the other.
Indeed. And it makes sense that they're intertwined, right? Because it's all about reading things and your own personal sensitivities to the world, right? The sensory inputs, it's so interesting how like it all boils down to how your brain interprets input from all the senses
Yeah.
and how you process those. It's really interesting.
And that if there's a hyper focus on something and it's a hyper focus on emotion or empathy, then there you go. It's all over but the crying. Literally.
Right.
Lord. And I think that's one of the things that I was very much so when I was younger, and therefore my amygdala was triggered all the time. But then after I got pregnant and my ADHD symptoms changed, it was gone there for a minute. And then it came back and now it's gone again. So I don't even know.
Don't even know. I think for women in particular, which of course is an understudied group per always,
Yeah.
hormones plays a huge role
Mhm.
in how these things manifest. Estrogen in particular, it plays a huge role in how everything functions in our bodies. And I imagine the pregnancy hormones, I think there's like prolactin. I can't
I have
even
no
remember
idea.
all the tons of stuff happening that have never been present before, managing all the tasks of being pregnant will change how the inputs are processed within your body. And then once those hormones are gone, okay, yeah, you're back to what from before. And then you go into menopause and then everything's wiped clean again. And then you're trying to function without all those hormones that were doing a lot of work for you. I can't even tell you.
Right. And that's my whole big thing now that I went down in tears about is that I worked for years to try and get Grace's all of her tricks and tips and how to get her through life. And she made honor roll at the beginning of the 6th grade. And then
Now hormones.
yes. And now I don't even know what her symptoms are anymore and how to address them. So yay.
And this is an incredibly understudied because, like I said, the disruptive boys got all of the attention and the inattentive ADHD or girls got nothing.
Yeah.
And we're all being diagnosed older. But Grace was the one who triggered everything for us, which is great. But she's having hormones.
Yeah.
And it's not clear how something's happening.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Heather and I are going to have a moment here. Woo! Okay. And I know that we talked about our mother in past episodes, and I believe everyone knows that she was schizophrenic. And with mental illness, you don't generally know you're mentally ill. And she thought she had a physical illness. And so she would say she called it the disease because she never got diagnosed with an actual condition because she did not have a disease. But she had deduced herself that this disease that she had was caused by children going through puberty. Maybe she realized the shift in herself when because I know for when she's going through puberty, although I know I'm going through menopause, but the difference, maybe there's some correlation there. No. All right.
I don't know, but I have had thoughts about her own. She had her own issues, clearly. And I suspect she was also ADHD. And there was no awareness of this, of course, because women were not diagnosed with ADHD. And it's not clear how much crossover in some of her symptoms. I imagine she had a lot going on. I don't think we have as much going on as she
Oh,
did.
yeah, absolutely not.
However, I do speculate. I'm like, I wonder how much of that was they're calling like some very controversial diagnosis when she was was ADHD, maybe she was ADHD, and they didn't know how to interpret that because women were not necessarily diagnosed with that.
Right. And
Even autism wasn't a thing then.
yeah. And what's interesting is that when I was doing my research, one of the things said that there are certain techniques you can do to help with ADHD, but there are some ADHDers who they say, oh, meditation, there's no freaking way I can meditate. And somebody said, one of the ways, like my meditation, which is shutting down the chatter, is reading. And not only am I thinking chatter from if it's ADHD, but schizophrenia is like full on chatter.
Yeah.
But
She definitely did have some clearly symptoms that were beyond ADHD.
yeah.
But it wouldn't surprise me if there was tons and tons of overlap.
Oh, for sure. Like with everything else,
Yeah.
the OCD and the dyslexia and then this and that. And
Yeah.
they even talk about how most women who have ADHD, adult women, they were always diagnosed with depression or anxiety because they didn't know ADHD, they should be looking for that.
Yeah.
And there's this whole like chart of crossover of which symptoms are associated with anxiety and which are just pure.
Well, of course, you're going to have anxiety if you're trying to, as a person, trying to adapt to a neurotypical world. That alone will induce anxiety because you don't fit. Well, neurotypical is just what people consider to be normal. And
Right.
then there's us who are just extra awesome.
And
we don't learn in the same way. We don't work the same way. And so you're trying to adapt to them, and it's extremely stressful, and it just creates anxiety. And I think in one of our last discussions, the concept of trauma, it is traumatic to try to exist as a neurodiverse person in a neurotypical world that is inherently traumatic because you don't fit, and they're trying to force the square peg into the round hole or whatever. Yes, you will have anxiety if you're untreated, neurodiverse woman in particular.
And I flagged something because I thought, oh my God, that sums it up perfectly. Let me see if I can find it. Oh,
She found it.
I did.
You're
So somebody said, when you have attention deficit, everybody's on page 10 and you're on page 3. At least that's my version of ADHD. I don't know if it's yours because I think you have the tabs, which I don't have.
I have the tabs. And my issue is that I have so much happening in my head that if I need to look at one thing and focus on one thing, I have a lot of stuff going on at once. And then when I get sensory input that I can't filter, I can't do the one thing.
So that's why when we're talking and Grace is talking in the background.
Oh, yes. My head, I start to have a tiny meltdown.
I know, I can see it in your face. But yes, because you can't even hear yourself think.
I'm like, I can't even, and I'm like,
I can't form
trying
words.
to be like,
yes.
Okay, who should I be focused on right now? I don't even know. And instead, I'm focused on nothing. I'm just like,
you hear the whooshing? Whooshing is happening.
The whooshing.
Okay, we know now that the splitting of the gum and all the M&Ms rolling around, we're putting human characteristics onto inanimate objects.
But it's a super empathy thing.
Yes. So we know, and which makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And I've heard that this trait is actually a crossover in the ADHD space, which is the autistic ADHD crossover area.
Our reason for this podcast is to support and uplift women in recognizing the impact undiagnosed ADHD has on their lives and to know that they are not alone. Discovery and grieving for what life could have been if we had only known and had help can be hard sometimes. If you have any thoughts you would like to share, you can email us at genx.adhd.sisters@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. #GenX ADHD sisters.